Hi, I'm Ken. Today we're going to take a little look at my Polish stamps. Poland has a rich postal history, but many of you only know them from dramatic and colorful stamps like these. These are commemorative stamps, and most of you know that I don't usually collect commemorative stamps, but I really have no problem with those of you who love them. They really can be very nice. In a moment I'm going to talk a little about Polish commemoratives, but before I do that I have to fix an omission from my previous video. Kettle Bodvin, I hope I'm saying that name right, commented on my British Queen Victoria stamp video. He pointed out that I had forgotten to explain how to tell the imperfect penny reds apart. With how long that video was, it's really hard to imagine I left anything out, but he was right. I had jumped right over them. Kettle, I really appreciate you letting me know. So let's fix that now. This is my table of Imperforate Victoria stamps. I did cover the penny blacks in the top section and the tuppenny blue stamps in the middle section, but I completely skipped the bottom section of the Imperforate penny reds. Looking at the table, I can see why now. My brain blocked me from diving into these. They are all but impossible. My brain just rebelled against this task. Bad brain. Bad. These are really hard to tell apart, but let's at least talk about how you might approach this when you need to. First, you'll notice that there are two dimensions in identifying these stamps. In the first column, I've noted black plates, and in the second column, I show plate 12. That stamp number 7 was printed using the same plates that were used to print the penny blacks. A new plate, plate 12, was used to print the stamps listed as numbers 8 through 12. There's one other stamp number for these stamps, stamp number 16. This stamp was never officially issued, and so I don't list it in my table. There are two other stamps listed as 16A and 16B, which were perforation trials. I don't list those either in my album, although some of the 16B stamps did actually get used. These are the stamps we need to identify. I've broken these into 3 rows. The first has our black plate number 7. The second row has our plate 12 stamps, numbers 8 through 12. The last row has the various experimental stamps with the number 16. The first identification issue is obvious from this image. It's the stamp shades. I've noted the Stanley Gibbons catalog names for these shades below each stamp. You might have started thinking, well, that's easy enough. But then I'll point out that the first stamp in each row is listed in the catalog as being red-brown. Clearly, these 3 stamps aren't the same color. It's really important to note again that you can't identify stamp colors in photographs or from a computer screen. I'm reasonably confident that these stamps weren't all photographed at the same time and under the same lighting conditions. Instead, it's best to think of colors like these relative to other examples you have together in real life. It's also really important to remember that color mixing wasn't as precise when these stamps were being produced, and there are effects from use, handling, light exposure, and aging on the colors of these stamps. With all that in mind, you don't have to worry about color variation on stamps in either the first or last row. They are officially all red-brown. It's the middle row we have to worry about. And honestly, it's really not that hard with a few examples in front of you. Before we start with that, though, I want to read you a note from the Stanley Gibbons catalog. Under these stamps, the editors have added, quote, "There are innumerable variations in color shade of the 1D red, and those given in the above list represent color groups each covering a wide range." End quote. That is, this is not an exact science. I'd go as far as to say that there was no intention in the manufacturing process to make these various shade differences, and I don't think they warrant separate catalog numbers. Nonetheless, collectors through the years have decided to sort them this way, and there's really no getting away from it now. We're really stuck with this minor silliness. To understand these shades, we start with the most common stamp. The bulk of the copies of these stamps will be that first red-brown stamp, stamp 8. You might be tempted to compare your stamps to the red-brown of a copy of the black plate stamp. Avoid that temptation. Those black plate stamps will all come in a full range of shades too, they just never got catalog numbers to confuse the issue. Anyway, to identify the first 3 stamps, 8, 9, and 10, you sort them into 3 groups by shade. The most common one is the red-brown, stamp 8. Lighter ones will be the pale red-brown, number 9, and darker ones will be the deep red-brown, number 10. The last 2 stamps are notably different though, and much rarer, worth 10 times as much as the red-brown stamps. The first is Lake Red. Lake Red is like the color of a brick, and it's missing those hints of brown that the first 3 stamps have. The last stamp, that orange-brown stamp, does have a hint of brown to it, and you might be tempted to think of it as a pale red, but it's not. It tends to be a bit brighter than that, like it has a hint of yellow to it. You know, like red and yellow make orange. never mind. You're only going to see this when you have a few of them in front of you. That is, you can't identify the color of these stamps until you get a few of them. I'd recommend that if you're in doubt, label your stamp as number 8. That's the shades. Let's move on to plates. Pretty nerdy, right? Figuring out what printing plate a stamp came from is fiddly business. It's a process known as plating. The plates used on this first stamp, Stanley Gibbons number 7, are the same printing plates that were used for the penny black stamp. The penny black plates are numbered 1 to 11, with only plates 1, 2, 5, and 7 through 11 being used to print the penny reds. To make it a little more difficult, plate 1 was reworked a couple of times, so platers have to pay attention to the reworked version of plate 1, sometimes noted as 1A through 1E. Funny, we have 8 plates being used for the black plate version of the penny red, but only 1 catalog number. On the other hand, we have just 1 plate used for all the others, that being plate 12, but it gets 5 different catalog numbers. Remember that catalog numbers are an artifact of what people collect, not some contrivance of the catalog editors. In this case, color variants, which are relatively easy to distinguish, get a few different collectible varieties. Then finding a red stamp that matches a penny black gets a special place in a collection, earning it a catalog number. Certainly you could collect all the different plate numbers and all the different plate positions via the corner numbers and then get color variants for all those. Some people do collect like that. You could if you wanted to, and you'd still need to figure out those plates. The way people go about plating is to compare their stamp to stamps from known plates. There are so many detailed differences across all these stamps since they were all engraved by hand. But the way people tend to do this is to compare the shapes and positions of the bottom corner letters. I've put a few links in the episode notes to websites that help you with this process if you want to give it a try. The first one I'll point you to is a book available for free on the Great Britain Philatelic Society. The book is called The Plating of the Penny. It's a great list of tables with measurements of the letter positions and other details for each stamp position. It's based off a huge multi-volume work originally published by Roland Brown and Harold Fisher. Mike Batty created this online version of the Brown-Fisher book, sorting the data into numerical order. The premise of the work is based on measuring 4 positions for each stamp position and then cataloging these into the huge tables. You can see those measurement points, A, B, C, and D, in this image. To make this work, you need to measure those positions down to the 1/10 of a millimeter. That sounds impossible, but the clever bit that Roland Brown came up with is a transparent ruler with diagonal lines that can be used as a gauge to measure to that level of precision. The Great Britain Philatelic Society website has an electronic version of this gauge. You load your stamp into the online gauge tool. They call that the e-gauge. I've put a link to that in the episode notes as well. Then you size your stamp to a box on the gauge to make sure it's the right size for measuring. Finally, you slide the e-gauge around to make your measurements. The book has tables for all the plate stamp positions, like I'm showing here. If you've measured right, you can look for your measurements in the chart and find which plate your stamp comes from. Fortunately, you can also enter your numbers into the GBPS site to have it spit out an answer for you. If that sounds hard, there's another approach people use. I've put a link to another website with this information. The Stamps of the World site has many images of all the various corner letters for each plate. It turns out that the human eye is oddly good at noticing slight differences. There's no measuring with this site. You look at your stamp and you look at the images of the various letters. They've clustered the images by the corner letters to make it easier. In many cases, you can confidently identify your stamp by finding the image that most closely matches your stamp. No measuring at all. I'm not going to say that any of this is easy. It's not. But if you want to plate your penny reds or even your penny blacks, that's how you go about it. Still with me? Good. If this all feels like too much, nobody's going to fault you for calling your stamp number 8. It's the most generic of these penny red imperfs, no special plate number and no special shade, and that's completely fine. Oh, and let's not forget those stamp number 16s. Remember these stamps on the bottom row? They were experimental stamps that weren't officially issued. There are unused copies available for the 16 and 16A stamps, and a few of the 16B stamps have been used, but those are the kinds of stamps that you're very unlikely to find in a pile of old stamps. If you have one, you probably bought it knowing what you were buying. Anyway, for completeness, let's talk about these 3 stamps. The first one, the Imperforate one, number 16, is on a special kind of paper called Dickinson paper. It has 2 silk threads running through the paper vertically. I couldn't find an image of these threads that was easy to see. It's the same kind of threads that we've talked about before with those embossed stamps. The second stamp, 16A, is a trial of a rouletted perforation. The perforations aren't holes for this stamp, but rather small slits between the stamps. This was never put into production in Great Britain. The third stamp, 16B, is the first trial of the perf 16 holes in the stamp, and some of these did slip through into postal use. All these stamps use the die 1 on the Queen's image, and of course all of them are perf 16. Those aren't too hard to identify, but I'm thinking that won't come up for most of us. At least I think it's good to understand what the catalog's saying about these stamps. Enough of these penny reds though. Thank you again, Kettle, for your question. I hope that clears up my big gap in the last video. Before we get back to my Polish stamps though, I also need to give a thank you to Paul, who runs the Instagram account Car Boot Philately. Paul is one of the best bargain hunters in the world. If you want to be inspired by the treasures you can find at a flea market, check out his Instagram channel. I put a link in the channel notes. Paul also saw my video about Queen Victoria stamps and noticed that I had a few holes he could fill in. He sent me along these three beauties right here. This is a little hard to see. Let me pop those up on the screen. The first one is the 1 shilling large colored corner letter stamp. I really like the diamond cancel on this one. The number 94 refers to the post office it was mailed from, in this case London. You can see the ON of London along the bottom. It's a lovely stamp. The next stamp is one of the overprint stamps I talked about. I still think it's funny that they printed a 6D over an already 6D stamp. It's not because people couldn't read the word, it's because the stamp ink was a hard color to read. That looks like a revenue cancel on this stamp. The final is one I never expected for my collection. It's one of the large format Victoria stamps. What a joy to add all three of these to my collection. Thank you, Paul, for thinking of me and sending these wonderful additions to my collection. Now it's finally time to get to my Polish stamps. These are a set of interesting Polish commemorative stamps. They are lovely and colorful. Also notice that most of them are larger than typical commemorative stamps. Along the top row are a whole bunch of flower stamps with different designs. I'm just showing one stamp for each of 6 different series of flower stamps. There's a lot more, but I don't plan to be exhaustive here. These are the kind of stamps that a topical stamp collector would really love. Poland is not particularly well known for its flowers, although they are known for that poppy on the 3rd and 4th stamps, but the others not so much, nor all the others that I'm not showing here. On the second row, I'm showing 3 spaceship stamps and 3 dinosaur stamps. Again, Poland is not particularly well known for its space program or its dinosaurs. Those first 2 spaceships are not even real spaceships, although the US did something similar on a stamp sheet, so you can't fault Poland too much for that. The next row shows some wonderful animal stamps, a dog, a cat, and some beautiful horses. Young collectors would love these, as would topical collectors. Next on the 4th row are a bunch of stamps from various Olympic sets. Collectors love sports stamps and Olympics in particular. You might be thinking that Poland doesn't commemorate anything particularly Polish, but that wouldn't be fair. On the last row there are a number of stamps with a distinct Polish flair. Similar to other countries, they feature famous buildings, historic events, people, and art. Obviously, I've picked these stamps to make a point. Let's go back to the top. With these stamps, Poland is catering to the stamp collecting market. These stamps were not made specifically for sending letters in Poland, but instead as a source of revenue from stamp collectors. You may notice that all of these stamps have a really neat light corner cancel that doesn't obstruct the stamp image. If you had one in front of you, you'd also notice that these stamps still have their gum on the back. They haven't been used. These stamps are known as cancel to order stamps, or CTOs for short. These stamps were largely produced and canceled to be shipped to stamp dealers who put them into stamp packets for collectors. Some collectors call these stamps packetware. Poland got some revenue and collectors got some really pretty stamps. Everybody wins. Although some people would say that these aren't postage stamps at all. They might say that these are stickers that have been made to look like postage stamps. There is some truth to that. Although each of these stamps could have been found in Poland used for postage, there were way more of these made for collectors than for postage. There's also a little bit of snobbishness in that attitude. The idea being that a collector should feel shame for wanting to collect these mere stickers. that they're somehow stupid or have been tricked into buying these non-postal labels. That's just pure elitism. There's no right way to collect stamps. You can collect what you want. There are many topical collectors out there who love every stamp they find with a flower, a spaceship, or a dinosaur. Even kids who haven't decided to become topical collectors would be enthralled with these kinds of stamps. They're inexpensive and they're fun. Well, and isn't that why we do this hobby, to have fun? Why would someone rain on that? I won't. I would like you to know, though, if you are collecting CTO stamps. You should collect them if you enjoy them, but it might be good if you knew why they existed. So I have here in front of me an album of stamps that I got in a lot recently. And this is not my album. This is just an album of stamps that I haven't fully gone through yet. Poland, it turns out, is not the only country that makes CTO stamps. A lot of countries made CTO stamps, but they're notably in Soviet bloc countries. But let's take a look at some examples of those just to give you a flair of what CTO was at the time. This is the first section I've marked off. These are stamps from the Ajman state. You've got a space stamp here. There's, no space program in Ajman as far as I can tell. You can see the CTO cancels on these. We've got a Kennedy stamp. Obviously, Kennedy has nothing to do with Ajman states. We've got art and we've got roses. So very common in some of those early Arabian early Arabian area stamps. We turn the page now to Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is another Soviet bloc country. They made a huge number of CTO stamps, although there aren't any on this page. When we turn the page, we'll start to see cars, some Olympic stamps here that I don't have. You see more animal stamps in the album. A huge purveyor of CTO stamps. Here's a horse. Here's more horses, more Olympics, a tiger, more Olympics. So you see sports and animals in this Czechoslovakia album, or part of the album. We'll turn the page to East Germany. East Germany is another Soviet bloc country. Right off the bat, you see roses, other kinds of flowers. East Germany was very big on making even their regular issue stamps into packetware CTO stamps. So you have those in there as well. Turning to the next country here, we have Hungary. Hungary has obviously these very beautiful, colorful mask stamps. Hungary was a big purveyor of packetware CTO stamps. On this page, you can see some Olympic stamps. There's a lot of Olympic stamps over here, some fruit, some flowers, a lot of beautiful stamps from Hungary, some folk scenes of hunting. So very more flowers and butterflies over here. So Hungary, big purveyor of CTO stamps. We turn the page to our old friend Poland. Some of the stamps I've already shown you, but you see ships there, more sports, more Olympics. You see all those dog and cat pictures, leopard, lots of nice stamps like that. Turning the page, we've got some birds, some mooses, some other nice animals and flowers. So Poland, one of the bigger purveyors of these kinds of CTO stamps, which means that a lot of people poo-poo collecting Poland because they're filled with these lovely but some disliked stamps in postal history. Here's Romania, another big supplier of CTO stamps. You can see here stamps I don't have, lots of Olympic themes, animal themes, plant themes, boxing, etc. I think this is worth pointing out. Oh, some butterflies I think are worth noting. This one's worth pointing out. It looks like Olympic stamps. I think these are more Romanian than they are your classic packetware. Olympic rings, even though these aren't the Olympics that we think of, this is the Olympics of chess. So I think this is a really interesting set. You can see chess pieces in the background. I just love that set, actually. Anyway, that's just to show you some stamps from around the world using this same technique of showing animals and sports, etc., as a CTO in order to supply interesting topical stamps to the collector market. I don't usually collect CTO stamps, but I'm happy they exist. They are really so much fun to collect. Actually, I don't usually collect commemorative stamps at all. For me, there's just too many of them. I've had to focus my collection down to keep it manageable. Some people do that by focusing on a few countries. Other people do that by focusing on specific topic areas. I do that by focusing on regular issue stamps. Let's dive into my collection, as it is, of Polish regular issue stamps. Poland has a rich postal history. This is my stockbook of Polish stamps. The postal system started in the mid-1500s, a very long time before their first postage stamps were issued in 1860. This stamp looks like a Russian stamp at the time. Prior to the release of this stamp, Poland was variously part of Germany, Austria, and Russia. At this time, Poland was a semi-autonomous kingdom under the control of the Russian Empire. Stamps like this one would only remain in use for 5 years before Poland fell under full control of the Russian Empire, using Russian stamps during that period. The next milestone in Polish postal history is the occupation of the area by Austria and Germany at the start of World War I. Austrian stamps were used in Austrian-occupied areas, but special overprints were issued by Germany for the German-occupied areas. I have a few of those stamps here. These are my extras for when I put together a Polish stamp album. My main collection of these stamps is in my World War I collection. These stamps came out with 2 inscriptions. The first says, in German, Russian Poland, Russisch Polen. That's them in the first strip. I have the first 4. I'm missing the 40 pfennig stamp. The second and third strips came out the next year. They say General Government Warsaw. There are 11 denominations of these stamps, and I have 5 of them so far. During the war, local mail delivery was left to local towns to set up. Mostly they used hand stamps for this purpose, but there were a few stamps that saw some local use during that period. These are some of mine on the bottom of this page. These stamps were printed for use in Lubomie, but the war ended before they could be put into use. These stamps are fascinating for a few reasons. First, they were printed in 4 languages: German, Polish, Yiddish, and Ukrainian. 4 languages on a single stamp is quite unusual. The second thing I want to point out is the bottom left stamp. Look at the denomination. The number 50 is upside down. This particular stamp is more rare than the regular stamp, but it was an error made on purpose to increase interest with collectors. After the war, a number of the local stamps from Warsaw would be overprinted for use in the newly independent Poland. There are 4 of these issues, and they aren't particularly expensive, but I don't have any of those yet. I do have these stamps, though. These stamps are those earlier German general government overprints with an additional overprint added to them. Notice that the new overprint crosses out General Government Warsaw and German Reich to replace them with Poczta Polska, which means Polish postal system. These stamps are actually pretty common and inexpensive, except for that second stamp. I've shown that stamp on this channel before. On that stamp, the second overprint is inverted. These were made quickly, and a number of errors like this are known. Although I still haven't found out much more about this stamp, I did find one like it that sold for $250 at an auction. This was one of those treasures I found from the lots I bought at last year's gas show. There's value in treasure hunting for sure. In those first 2 years after the war, the Polish postal system relied on overprinting existing stocks of stamps that had been left over from the war. Besides those German overprints, Austria had left behind stocks of stamps that were put to this use. Most of those stamps are rare and expensive. There are a few I might run across, but I don't have any of those yet. Obviously, these stamps are a bit chaotic in my stockbook. I haven't yet made my Polish stamp album, but I think I will soon. I'm still working on my Belgium album. Still, let's dive into some more and go over the rest of what I do have. In 1919, the first new designs for Poland started to come out. These would be the first Polish-based stamps issued for the country since the first stamp in 1860. I'm not sure we can really count this as a Polish design since the stamp looks so much like the Russian issues of the day. So we have the one issue in 1860, and then for 60 years, Poles sent their mail using the stamps of Russia, Austria, and Germany. Then in the early years after the war, Poland used those same non-Polish stamps overprinted with Polish postal system. I have the first truly Polish stamp on the first row of my stockbook. Actually, the first design is that last stamp on the first row. It features the Polish eagle, the coat of arms of Poland. I have just the highest denomination of this set, although the rest of the set is fairly common and inexpensive. I've been saying Poland as if it's somehow the same Poland that exists today. It wasn't. This map shows Poland as it was in the time period right after World War I. First, notice that the eastern side of Poland borders the USSR. Actually, the whole eastern third of Poland was in what is today the western parts of Belarus and Ukraine. There's a little overlap with Lithuania, too. Also note that along the top of Poland is a region marked East Prussia. East Prussia was a German state at the time. It's worth noting that East Prussia was cut off from the rest of Germany by what was known as the Polish Corridor. That region was ceded to Poland to give it access to the coast. If you look close enough to the left of East Prussia, there's a little coastal area labeled Danzig. And while it's now part of modern Poland, during this period they issued their own stamps. I'm not going to spend too much time on these stamps. They are a delight to collect. The designs are so colorful and ornate. It's also nice that these stamps are relatively inexpensive. I'm particularly fond of Germania stamps, and the first issues of Danzig are Germania stamps overprinted in various ways. Danzig would start issuing stamps in 1920 and would cease to be autonomous at the start of World War II when it was occupied by Germany. At the end of that war, the region would become part of Poland. The next series released for Poland were these stamps. There are 5 basic designs for this series, but I only have examples of these 4. What I'm missing is a 2.5 mark stamp featuring a man plowing a field. That stamp is called the Peace design. Oddly, the blue stamp I'm showing here is called the Agricultural design. It shows a scythe and stalks of wheat. The last stamp is a Polish cavalryman. It seems like a rather odd symbolic choice for the newly independent country. You'll notice in my stockbook that I have a rather mess of stamps stacked together. That's because I'm saving extra copies of many of them until I can get them all properly identified. These stamps came out in a number of different formats, and the 2 smaller designs would be re-released as part of a later series a few years later. At any rate, these stamps were released in 5 basic formats. I think I can explain them all from these copies. First, these stamps came out both perforated and imperforate. I'm showing an imperforate version on the second row now. Second, and this is a tricky bit, there were slightly different stamps for northern Poland than for southern Poland. The 2 regions used different currencies. In the north they use fenigi and marka, so the northern stamps are denominated with F and M. Southern Poland used halerzy and korona. Those stamps are denominated with H and K. You can see on the bottom row that the first stamp is denominated in F for use in the north, and the second is denominated in H for the south. You can see the same double currency usage in the earlier overprinted stamps, with some using either F or PF, fenigi with an F, or PF for the German spelling of Pfennig, and others using H and K. Shortly after the war, the Republic unified its currency on the fenigi and marka, reissuing the stamps for use in the whole country, but this time on different paper and with slightly different denomination designs. There's an example of that hiding sneakily on the first row. The second stamp, the 40F stamp, is the new design. Notice that the number is larger than the comparison stamp on the second row, and the denomination uses a much larger F. In my stamps, I still have some work to sort these out. I may not have all the details just right yet. Obviously, there's more work for me as I get these pages made for these stamps, but I'm saving my various copies until I do. I'll share more details once I get my album pages created. Now this page is more than a little out of order because some rows filled up before I got other stamps. In the middle of the 4th row is the next regular issue design that came out. This stamp was added to the existing set in 1922 to extend it to higher values. Is it a commemorative or a regular issue? Hard to tell. The design is a sower and a rainbow of hope. It came out to commemorate the signing of a peace treaty with Russia. While the design evokes the designs of the previous regular issues, it wouldn't be wrong to think of this as a commemorative stamp. At first I left this out of my collection, but then I looked forward and found that this stamp is reprinted later in the year in a new size. Not a very commemorative thing to do. The next year, this stamp would be overprinted with new values along with a few of the other existing regular issue stamps. Poland clearly grouped this design in with the other regular issue designs. It's a call, sure, but I've decided to keep this in my regular issue collection. The regular issue set would be further extended into higher marca value stamps using this design. The denominations of this eagle design would go from 25 marca to 200 marca. The original stamps went from 3 pfennige to 8 marca. The Rainbow and Hope design goes from 10 marca to 20 marca, which fits so neatly between the range of the two sets that are obviously regular issues that it confirms to me that the Hope stamps at least filled the role of regular issue stamps. I really like these two-color designs. I've been a little surprised by them too until I realized that while these stamps are early designs in the history of Poland, they still came out after World War I, when the stamp design sophistication of most countries was increasing. The set would get another refresh with the addition of this design of a minor. The new set would go from 5 pfennige to 300 marca, with the higher values from 400 marca to 2000 marca being served still by the eagle design. I've saved multiple copies of these stamps because they came out printed in both flat plate and rotary plate versions, although Scott just has one catalog number for both of those. I plan to collect both types. I do consider these stamps to be regular issue stamps. That said, they were released for the Union of Upper Silesia and Poland. Upper Silesia is a region known for mining, hence the miner stamp. By some measure, you could think of these as commemoratives too. Some lines in stamp collecting can be blurry. I'm turning to some of my stamps from Upper and Eastern Silesia. The top of this page has my Upper Silesia stamps. The region known as Eastern Silesia is on this fourth row. This is a region at the border intersection of Poland, Germany, and Czechoslovakia. The people there were a mixture of Poles, Germans, and some Czechs. There was a plebiscite in the region after World War I which favored not joining Poland, but conflict followed with most of the region ultimately joining Poland. It's a little more history than I want to dive into today. The Eastern Silesia stamps on the fourth row were issued to advertise a plebiscite for the region between Poland and Czechoslovakia. That plebiscite never happened, but large numbers of these stamps were issued and were in use for a short time. So these two additional postal regions are reasonably part of the postal history of Poland, where I include them in my collection. Scott lists these as completely independent jurisdictions in the catalog. The region of Silesia would again be contested with the start of World War II. Moving forward in Polish philately is the beginning of the period of hyperinflation. During this period, the previous eagle stamp design would be reissued with larger denominations. This design had been the high-value stamp of the previous set, ranging from 25 marca to 2000 marca. These new values were the lower denominations, starting at 10,000 marca, going as high as 2 million marca. Between June of 1923 to December, the internal letter rate in Poland would go from 300 marca to 100 billion marca. Letters with dozens of high-value stamps are known, but rare. I have examples of these hyperinflation issues in the fifth row of my page. On either side of them are stamps denominated on groszy, which is 1/100th of the new zloty currency issued to address the hyperinflation problem. The zloty is still used in Poland as currency to this day. The next series, which came out in 1925, featured important views in Poland. There's the Holy Gates of Vilnius, the Poznan Town Hall, the Sigmundson Monument, the Wawel Castle, the Sobliski statue, and the Ship of State. Each of these, except for the Poznan Town Hall, came in multiple denominations and colors, and it turns out that a few of these were redrawn the next year. In the first version, the lines of the clouds ran right into the numbers like on the left. On the right, the line of white was added to separate them. Here's a closer look. I think it's really easy to see the difference around the 1. Next in my stamps, there's a row of stamps with portraits on them. During this period, there were a number of different releases with portraits, although not really released together as a set. Some of them are rightly commemoratives, and others are meant to be regular issues. I don't have examples of all of them yet. I'll work this all out for myself when I eventually make up my Polish album pages. The next series came out in 1928 and would be refreshed in 1932, a pretty long-running series. These are very common. There are 2 versions of frames around the smaller eagle coat of arms stamp. The second one on the right also has a watermark, but you won't need that to identify them. The frames are distinct enough, I think. These stamps also came in surcharged, commemorative overprints and were overprinted for use in the Polish postal offices in Danzig. Remember Danzig? It's that little area to the west of East Prussia. During this period, Danzig was an independent city, neither German nor Polish. At the end of World War I, the proposal was to give Danzig to Poland as their port city, but the people of Danzig, being mostly German heritage, didn't want that, and so the area was made independent. It was also partly Polish, though, and Poland set up a foreign postal office there as well, using Polish stamps overprinted Port Gdansk. The stamp on the left is one of those stamps, Port Gdansk being the Polish name for the city. The stamp on the right is an early Danzig stamp overprinted on a Germania stamp. The Polish post office in Gdansk would be the site of one of the first conflicts at the start of World War II. The staff of the post office, supported by a small deployment of military personnel, held off capture by German forces for nearly a day. All but 4 of the defenders were killed in the standoff. Those 4 were tried and executed in the aftermath. The brave defenders of this post office are remembered as heroes in Poland. There were also a dozen Polish stamps from this period overprinted with Levant. These were issued for use in the Polish offices in Turkey. I don't have any of these to show you, though. They are just slightly out of my price range. Moving back to the stamps I do have, though, the 2 larger stamps on the second to last row are very common stamps that I've gone back and forth with, sometimes considering them as commemoratives, sometimes as definitives. I'm currently leaning toward commemoratives. And that's the end of my first page. I get a little sparse in this section of my collection. There's a new set of important Polish sites on the first 2 rows. There are a few other singles in this period that count as regular issues that I don't have yet. I've left space for them. On the 4th row, there's another new series. It came out honoring the 20th anniversary of Polish independence, 20 years since the end of World War I, 1918. Those of you with a good head for history know what's coming next. This would be the last regular issue for independent Poland for a while. The catalog shows a few more commemorative issues for Poland, but then there's a date hop until 1944. That's the end of World War II. During the war, there was no Polish government in Poland, so there were no Polish stamps used in Poland. There was a Polish government in exile, though. They continued to exert influence in the self-determination of Poland, and as governments in exile do, they issued a series of stamps. Now, oftentimes stamps like this are not considered to be anything but propaganda labels. Scott tends to leave those out of the catalog, sometimes adding an explanation paragraph about their existence. But the Polish government in exile set up floating post offices on merchant and warships and officially used these stamps, cementing them as valid postage and giving them the official government recognition that was implied from other governments accepting them as valid. During World War II, mail services were run by the Germans in the West and the Russians in the East. The area to the east never returned to Poland at the end of the war, so stamps of this area, Russian stamps, are generally not collected with Poland. I won't cover those here. But in the areas controlled by Germany, region-specific stamps were issued by Germany. Those stamps were first issued on German stamps that were overprinted Deutsche Post Osten. Next, they issued stamps that were overprinted on Polish stamps with the words General Government. And finally, in an act that signaled an expectation of permanence, Germany issued new designs, brand new designs, that were labeled General Government. Let's take a look at some of my stamps in that area. I've got 2 pages for these issues. At the top here, I have the overprinted stamps. The stamps along the top row are the first World War II issues. These were German Hindenburg stamps overprinted with German Post East. These stamps were for use in the central parts of what had been Poland. The area would later be renamed to the General Government for the occupied Polish region. General Government on the second row of these stamps and later issues is short for that. This occupied region was not the whole of Poland. Of course, I already mentioned the Russian areas that weren't included here, but I understand that the northern and eastern regions of Poland were not considered occupied Polish regions by the Germans, but rather just straight up recognized parts of Germany that had been lost after World War I and reclaimed. This region would use German stamps during the war. The stamps on the second row were Polish stamps, overprinted as aggressively as you could imagine, in a very real way, obliterating Polish sovereignty and pride. The goal was to literally wipe away Poland and the Polish people. Honestly, that's more than I want to dive into on this channel, but you can see it in these stamps. that while the official name included the phrase occupied Polish regions, even that was left off these stamps, leaving no mention of Poland. Starting in 1940, Germany would issue new designs for this occupied Polish region. Those first issues would feature important sites in Poland. Given the goals and propaganda at the time, I can't make sense of why these sites were honored on German-issued stamps. The stamps on the last row of this page and along the top row of this page make much more sense to me. In all my albums, I invert the stamps with this person's image on them. As much as these stamps are offensive, they are part of the postal history of Poland. Including them in my collection forces me to understand them and the historic drivers around how they came to exist. Poland was liberated from Germany in 1944 by the Russians and began running their own postal system again. This is a huge oversimplification, though. My point is that despite the war generally ending in 1945, there are once again a Polish postal system starting as early as 1944. My post-World War II stamps don't start into 1945. Like I've said, I'm sparse on these stamps. One of the things I like about this period is the huge format of the early post-war stamps. This would be largely true until the first stamps that look like standard definitive stamps came out starting in 1948. Those are them along the bottom row. Those stamps feature Polish President Beirut. He would be president between 1947 and 1952. It was a tumultuous political era in Poland. Beirut would be the first non-acting president of Poland during this period, and indeed the last president before the role was abolished in favor of a national council. I think this is a good place to stop for today. There's a lot more interesting Polish regular issue stamps. They tend to feature important Polish locations in the post-war period. Actually, my collection of Polish stamps ends before 1989, when a non-violent Polish revolution transformed the country from Soviet-style communism to a democratic republic. My collection is not at a point with those later issues to do justice to that era yet, so this is where I'll stop. I thought this would be a short episode. Apparently I was wrong. I know that my Polish collection isn't as neat as some of my other country collections. Let's take that as some reassurance that we're all on a collecting journey with the final destination still a long way away. That's a good thing, I hope, because it leaves so much more fun to have collecting. I'm sure that my knowledge in this area is just as spotty as my collection. For those of you with a better understanding or even corrections of what I've shared, please drop a note in the comments so we can all learn together. In the meantime, happy collecting.